Week 6 fantasy football, top 10 takeaways, instant reactions, breaking news, and injury updates you need to know right here on Fantasy Points. Let's get it.
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
What's going on? This is Theo Greminger, Fantasy Football Daily on the Fantasy Points Podcast Network and Fantasy Points YouTube. Wild Week 6. Recording this one on Sunday evening. Of course, we have a doubleheader on Monday night. Got the big Sunday night game between Detroit and Kansas City, which is about to kick off. But for me, I got to dive into the games Thursday through Sunday. Really another wild week. A lot of positives, some big negatives. Got to talk about some injuries a little later on, some tilting ones for fantasy managers, some significant injuries we need to talk about a little later. But we got to start talking about teams when they come out of bye weeks. And we love seeing players come out of bye weeks and absolutely smash, because you've had teams who have gone into the bye weeks with a chance to self-scout, to figure out what's working, and coming out of the bye week, this is what we're going to do. We're going to get the ball to this guy, and this guy's going to cook for us. This is the guy who's going to put up the points for us in fantasy. This is the guy that we are going to lean on in the second half of the season. And you learn a lot about teams when they come out of bye weeks. And we got to talk about a Josh Jacobs appreciation night. Josh Jacobs coming out of the bye week. There's offensive line injuries in Green Bay. Green Bay has had a little bit of tilting moments here. After week 2, we were talking about Green Bay as a potential Super Bowl type team. And they can still get there. But now they've had some hurdles under their way. We've seen Josh Jacobs and the Green Bay Packers in week 3 with the upset loss to Cleveland. Really a shocking one in which they were leading the game. Cleveland comes back, beats them. Then we saw in week 4 that shootout against Dallas, where it was a very disappointing tie. So they go into the bye week, they come out of it, they really need a win. And what do? They lean on Josh Jacobs. Jacobs was remarkable last year in Green Bay. He would have been a much bigger storyline in 2024 if it wasn't for Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry, also free agent running backs who absolutely smashed. But Jacobs, coming out of the bye week, 18 carries, 93 yards, and he adds 5 catches for 57 yards. And of course, he gets you 2 touchdown scores. Jacobs now has back-to-back weeks with 30-plus fantasy points. And these 2 weeks are 2 of the 6 highest-scoring weeks at the running back position this entire season. So we've really seen it with Jacobs. Back-to-back weeks where he's getting, 18, 22 carries, getting those 2 rushing scores. That's fantastic. But the thing that's very impressive about Jacobs is we've now had 3 games where he's had at least 4 receptions. So they're leaning on Josh Jacobs as a runner, but you're also getting the added bonus of Josh Jacobs contributing as a pass catcher. This is a well-rounded back right now and a potential top 5 scorer for the rest of the season at the running back position. Really, really excited about what Josh Jacobs can do. We saw it last year where Green Bay ramped him up over the second half of the year, and it was just run after run after run, week after week after week. Of course, we had the touchdown scoring streak for Josh Jacobs, but Jacobs is on fire. Green Bay gets the much, much needed win against the Cincinnati Bengals today. Definitely a positive there when it comes to Josh Jacobs managers. Get that 27-18 win, break that little streak with the loss and a tie, and do it behind Josh Jacobs. Just a great one there. And I feel like I repeat myself on some of these shows. I'm trying to keep it fresh. I'm trying to cover different players, different weeks. But last week we talked about the Tampa Bay-Seattle game where it was Emeka Egbuka going up against Jaxon Smith-Njigba. This week we're just talking about JSN. JSN is looking like a league winner right now. And we don't say that with hyperbole. We don't love throwing around the L word in fantasy football. If you're going to be called a league winner, you have to be a league winning value. And that also factors in ADP. And JSN, there are so many of you out there holding 3rd round shares of JSN, holding occasional 4th round shares of JSN. where you are absolutely feeling like you found the league winner. And Puka Nacua has been fantastic. Don't get me wrong. We're going to talk about him a little later with a potential injury for Puka. But JSN, you were able to get him at that part of the draft where Puka Nacua, you're having to use a top 15 pick on. With JSN, you were able to get him in the 3rd and 4th round. And look at some of the players he was being drafted next to if you want to feel even better about this one. JSN is clearing the players drafted around him at ADP. JSN with another massive week just goes up there and does it nearly every week. But this week was special. A 30-point game, 13 targets, 8 catches, 162 yards, and a touchdown. And the outlying metrics were ridiculous. A 54% target share for JSN. And Seattle continues to win games. So when we look at JSN over the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it's absolutely insane what's going on here. A 27-point week in week 5, a 30-point week in week 6. And that's on top of he only has 1 game this season with fewer than 18 PPR points. He is absolutely in the contention for the wide receiver 1 overall. JSN is only 23 years old. This is a transcendent player and a player that Seattle knows what they have with him. This is Clint Kubiak's offense. This is Sam Darnold completely locked in on JSN. JSN is looking like a league winner. And speaking of league winners, Rico Dowdle, for many of you, was a waiver wire pickup. And for the rest of you who said, not in my league, bro, we drafted Rico Dowdle. Yeah, you drafted Rico Dowdle, but even in NFFC, FFPC, you were drafting him in the 14th, 15th, 16th round. He was not getting steamed up like a Zach Charbonnet level player who was being drafted as a highly drafted RB2. No, there was a big gap between him and Chuba Hubbard. But right now it's looking like Rico Dowdle is going to take over this backfield and run with it. We talked about him last week, and I said, you can't really throw out a 200-yard game like this. There's no such thing as a fluke 200-yard game. And a couple people in the YouTube comments, they came at me a little bit and were like, hey, Theo, this are these guys. And that's why we have such an educated audience at Fantasy Points. You guys are able to pull names like Thomas Rawls, Isaiah Crowell. I'll add, I talked about this in another podcast. Thomas Rawls also had a 170-yard game his season. He did 200. But let's stay on focus here when it comes to Rico Dowdle. I recommended him as a buy in Dynasty last week off of the big scoring week because I said this is not going to stop. And there's a chance this is going to be a takeover candidate. And we saw how good Rico Dowdle was last week. Rico Dowdle, unbelievable. Talk about the 200 rushing yard performance. And it was fantastic. And we said he's going to come back with a revenge game against Dallas this week. And it couldn't be another smash week. Well, he goes out and gets 200 yards from scrimmage again. So he doesn't get the 200 rushing yards, but he does have 183 rushing yards. Carolina also wins the football game. Carolina's been lights out at home this year. Carolina wins the football game against Dallas. Rico Dowdle in a revenge game against the Cowboys has 30 carries for 183 yards, and he adds 4 catches for 56 yards and a touchdown. So last week he gets you 32.4 points. This week, even better, 33.9. There's all this discourse going on X right now. Will Chuba Hubbard come back and be the starter? Rico Dowdle, are they going to be in a split? What's going to happen in Carolina? It's going to be Rico Dowdle. Rico Dowdle is the main back in Carolina moving forward. And if I get an L on this one, I'll come back and I'll own this L. But I feel strongly about this one. How could you put this one back in the box? This is a win against the Dallas Cowboys. This is Dave Canales in year 2. And let's talk about Dave Canales. Dave Canales benched Bryce Young for Andy Dalton. Dave Canales benched Miles Sanders, the big free agent signing. Go back and look at the guaranteed money that the Carolina Panthers gave Miles Sanders heading into last season. And Chuba Hubbard, an incumbent back that he inherited, didn't draft. This wasn't like Dave Canales' guy. He inherited Chuba Hubbard as the new head coach, and he gave the job to Hubbard because he deserved it. Now, I get that Chuba Hubbard was paid last year, and I think Chuba Hubbard is a very good player. We talked about him on a lot of my podcasts last year. Chuba Hubbard delivered last year, but this is a player doing things that Chuba Hubbard would not be doing right now. This is ridiculous performance from Rico Dowdle. This is the first time a player has had 200 yards from scrimmage in back-to-back weeks since Dalvin Cook in like 2020. That stat was from Field Yates of ESPN. I saw that one on X, and it was just mind-blowing to me. You think about all these incredible backs we've had in the NFL, and this is the first time this has happened since 2020. Dave Canales is not a dummy. Dave Canales is not some guy who's going to say, I got to go back to this guy. Got to go back to him. He's already showed that in the past. This is Rico Dowdle. And if you have Rico Dowdle managers in your league, dynasty or redraft, who are thinking that they're selling high because Chuba Hubbard, they're going to outsmart you, and they're going to get you to pay for this guy who had a 2-week great stretch because they know they're smarter than we are, and they know that it's going to be Chuba Hubbard when he comes back. Take advantage of those guys because I don't think they're seeing the forest for the trees. Rico Dowdle now has the highest scoring week among any running back this season, and he has the 4th highest scoring week. Rico Dowdle is on fire. Back-to-back 200-yard from scrimmage performances, back-to-back 30-plus PPR performances. He's locked in. Let's talk about another potential league winner. And you're saying, okay, Theo, stop using this L word. Okay, but I got to talk about my guy, George Pickens here. And George Pickens, some of you have access to in the 5th round of drafts. A lot of you have access to George Pickens in the 5th round of drafts. And George Pickens is simply on fire right now. And I get with George Pickens that in the back of your mind, for a lot of you, he is doing this without CeeDee Lamb. But the way that Dallas is structured, Dallas can't stop anyone. And Dallas is going to pass the ball a ton. 2 wide receivers can finish as wide receiver 1s in this offense. And George Pickens is not going to go away. A massive performance today from Pickens. And to read out his stats doesn't really do justice. Go watch the highlights of this one. Go watch the game, the condensed version of the game. If you have Game Pass, go watch that one. Or at least watch the highlights. Pickens was awesome. 9 catches, 168 receiving yards, and a touchdown on 11 targets. This is Pickens' 2nd game with 30-plus fantasy points in the last 3 weeks. We saw what he did against Green Bay in the 40-40 wild game, where he had 134 receiving yards, 8 catches. Even better this week, 168 receiving yards. George Pickens now has 4 games this year with 17.8 points or better. He's not going away here. And Dallas has a big one next week against Washington. Then they go on the road to Denver, which will be an interesting one because Pat Surtain will be on either CeeDee Lamb or George Pickens. He might be on George Pickens the way Pickens is playing this game right now and the fact that they're going to use CeeDee Lamb a lot in the slot. But the Washington game should be an absolute smash week again for George Pickens. It's hard to put this one away. If you have George Pickens in Dynasty, you should be smiling ear to ear because this guy is going to get a massive bag in the offseason. He's going to get paid an absolute fortune to either stay with Dallas or go be 15 different NFL teams, wide receiver 1. Pickens is simply on fire right now. Looks terrific. We have a little bit of clarity here. Some bad news for us Omari and Hampton managers this morning. A report drops that Hampton is going to miss more than 4 weeks. So a lot of us were hoping this would be a clean injury. Hampton comes back in 4 weeks, and that's it. Sounds like it's going to be a choppier one. Last week, we talked about Hassan Haskins versus Kimani Vidal. My initial reaction was Haskins. Then we sort of pivoted over. I went on the couch with Sigmund Bloom, talked up Kimani Vidal, talked about him a little bit on a couple of other podcasts. And it wasn't like, this is something I could have foreseen. But I did think we could see the passing game usage for Vidal. And that showed. Kimani Vidal had 3 catches for 14 yards and a touchdown, and then really impressed with 18 carries for 124 yards on the ground. Vidal, of course, a second-year back out of Troy. He had a lot of hype for him heading into the 2024 season. There was a lot of managers in Dynasty and in redraft sort of drafting him, saying he'll be the takeover candidate in a Harbaugh-Roman offense. It didn't work out last year, but it's working out now. He has this opportunity. 67% of snaps today, dominated Hassan Haskins with 72% of the attempts. He had an 11% target share, which was very telling. LA wins a close game, and Kimani Vidal had 50% route participation. So he's locked in right now. He's in your lineup next week. There's a lot of rumors right now that LA is going to acquire a running back. And I think that would make sense with Kimani Vidal and Hassan Haskins. But a lot of people are jumping to the conclusion that this is going to be LA going out and getting out an Alvin Kamara type, getting a Breece Hall type. See, I don't see that. I think LA is going to go out and get, and I don't even know if he's available, but a Jerome Ford type back where they'll get a back for depth. And I think it's an opportunity that could be a committee backfield, or I think it could be a Kimani Vidal leads them and we just have a little bit of solid depth there. I think they're going to get what they can out of Vidal with a little Haskins behind him and whoever else they add until Hampton can come back. Hampton's season's not over. They've clarified that. And with Vidal, I don't think you have to worry about him getting a potential situation like we saw with Michael Carter, where Carter had the job, then conceded it, and we saw a lot of Bam Knight today. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think Kimani Vidal can be a sustainable player. If you added him, he's in your lineup next week. And if you're in a league where he's still available, he's absolutely in waiver wire consideration this week. Speaking of the Chargers, Quentin Johnston missed the game, and we had a huge Ladd McConkey week. Ladd McConkey, really, this was like the last 2 weeks have been a huge sigh of relief for McConkey managers. McConkey had 9 targets, finished the game with 7 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown, 16 targets over the last 2 weeks played, and 2 touchdown catches. He had 14.9 points against the Washington Commanders. Now he has 23 points this week. And maybe this is what Ladd McConkey is. Ladd McConkey, last year, we saw him ramp up as the season went along. Maybe that's just what this thing is. I think McConkey is trending upwards. I think that, like, the whole fear and trepidation we had on the marketplace in week 4, where we saw the bottom of what a McConkey week could look like, I think that's in the past. I think that moving forward, we can be more confident in him. Oronde Gadsden, also some impressive work there. Trey Harris filled in for the Quentin Johnston snaps, but Oronde Gadsden was also impressive. But the story really is Ladd McConkey. If you had him on your bench, he's completely back in your lineup. Probably was in your lineup today. But if you have a deep team with a ton of wide receivers and you were a little worried about this one, even with Quentin Johnston out, probably not the best process. But he's back in your lineup every single week moving forward. We know McConkey's a monster. We know what he did in the NFL playoffs last year, setting that record. The most receiving yards for a rookie in the history of the NFL last year, Ladd McConkey in a playoff game. McConkey's fully back in our lineups, fully back in our circle of trust. And now we've seen what a spike week can look like. McConkey looks completely locked in. And speaking of a big sigh of relief game, Brian Thomas Jr. BTJ, we finally get a little bit of sigh of relief here. Brian Thomas Jr. has been a really, really frustrating one for a lot of the season. But this week he has 8 catches for 90 yards and a touchdown on 10 targets. Jacksonville loses the game to Seattle, but this is what you want to see from BTJ. And I know there's going to be people out there saying, Theo, the guy also had a huge drop. And yeah, the drop was bad. And they're going to say, Theo, did you see the walk-in touchdown? Because it wasn't like BTJ went up and mossed somebody. I did. The touchdown was a little bit of a walk-in. But at the end of the day, you're getting BTJ with 10 targets, 8 catches, 90 yards, and a touchdown. This is sort of what was promised. BTJ, when we look at seasonal counting stats, he's not going to hit like we drafted him. It would be almost impossible. He'd have to have bigger games than this pretty much the rest of the way for him to return value on bottom end of the first round type performance. But when it comes to BTJ, we do see him trending up. It's slow and steady. Last week we had 12 points. This week we have 23 points. Week before we had 10.6. First 3 weeks of the season were completely ugly. But what's really, really kind of getting little bit exciting is the 10 targets today. It was a trailing environment, and they went to BTJ. That's exactly what you want to see if you're a fantasy manager. So BTJ, let's say, can BTJ just be good the rest of the way? Is week 6 going to be the week where moving forward, we have confidence in him. And can he do this again? I think that's really the biggest tell here is, can BTJ do this next week? Next week is the London game. And we know Jacksonville has this familiarity playing in London. They're playing the Rams in London. The Rams are a team that's going to put pressure on them. And we know that Jacksonville is going to have to keep up. Jacksonville's been a winning team this year. Let's see if they can get it going with their wide receiver one and keep this BTJ momentum heading into their week 8 bye week. Keep an eye on this one. But if you have BTJ, you finally get the sort of week that you were looking for from him. Talk about a wild one. Trey McBride, huge scoring week. Marvin Harrison Jr. gets knocked out of the game with a concussion. Trey McBride, 11 targets, 8 catches for 72 yards, and he gets a big touchdown. Jacoby Brissett was awesome. Jacoby Brissett, if you picked him up in a Superflex league, feel really, really good about that one. Kyler Murray missed, but Brissett, heading into Sunday Night Football, is QB5 on the week. He's going to be a QB1 on the week. And Jacoby Brissett had 320 passing yards and 2 passing touchdowns, also added about 20 yards on the ground. But what's crazy is we haven't seen Kyler Murray with this sort of a performance with 320 and 2 since 2022. So Jacoby Brissett really did some things for Trey McBride that we haven't necessarily seen. And there's been a little bit of Trey McBride sort of slander out there the last couple of weeks. I've seen it in some of my league chats with I'm in some pretty sharp dynasty leagues. And I know that there was one manager who's very successful FFPC manager sort of talking about Trey McBride. The guy doesn't score touchdowns. He gets sort of manufactured PPR scoring. And there was a lot of frustrated Trey McBride managers after that Tennessee game where he had a season low 9.1 points. But on the flip side, Trey McBride has had 7 targets or more in every single week this season. And he's now had 11 targets in 2 out of his last 3 games. I think McBride is trending up. Arizona gets Green Bay in week 7. Then they head into their week 8 bye week. McBride would still be my favorite to finish as the tight end 1 overall this season. He is going to be challenged by a few players. But I think when we get, and of course, Jake Ferguson off to a red hot start. Ferguson was a little bit quiet today against Carolina, but he did score a touchdown. The targets went way down. But when it comes to Trey McBride, I think this is the one from here on out will be the tight end 1. George Kittle's coming back as well, but we're going to keep an eye on Trey McBride. And could this be the week where things start to really take off for him? The touchdowns are nice for McBride. Anybody who rostered him last year he was just a tremendous pick to make, but the touchdowns were incredibly frustrating. McBride now has 2 receiving touchdowns on the year. Little baby steps here. Maybe we can turn this 2 in the first 6 weeks into something like 8 by the end of the season. That'll be a nice turn of events. But for Kyler Murray managers, seeing Jacoby Brissett put up this numbers can be a little bit frustrating here. We'll keep an eye on that one heading into next week. Will we see another Brissett week? I will be talking about him on our waiver wire show. And make sure you're tuning in to Fantasy Football Daily Podcast. I'm dropping multiple shows every single week. I'm going to drop my waiver wire show with Joe Dolan and Tom Brawley, a start sit with Graham Barfield, and then Ryan Heath, Graham Barfield, and myself are doing a rest of season rankings update with a couple of trade candidates for you to consider trading for. The players that are moving up the fantasy points rankings for the rest of the season. We're going to talk about them. Also, the School of Scott Fantasy Football Podcast, Scott Barrett and myself, every single week here on Fantasy Points YouTube and on the School of Scott podcast feed. And then Dynasty Life, that's my Dynasty podcast. Make sure you're subscribed to Dynasty Life. Most of those go on Fantasy Points YouTube as well, but we're doing a bunch of bonus episodes on the podcast feed. And a player that's moving up and up in Dynasty, also moving up and up in redraft, in our confidence levels for him, in our just wanting to get him in our lineups in every single kind of format, it's Drake Maye. Drake Maye is playing fantastic. He's looking like one of the best picks you could have possibly made at the quarterback position this season. Drake Maye was oftentimes drafted somewhere in that QB 12 through 15 range, and he's just cooking. We saw Drake Maye this has really been an awesome stretch for him, where in week 5, he won the huge game in Buffalo, where it was just a huge hurdle, a huge monkey off the backs of New England Patriots fans, and also, I'm sure, the coaching staff, to go into Buffalo and get a win. And of course, I'm thinking Baker Mayfield. He was balling today as well. But Drake Maye, with Drake Maye going in, getting that win over the Buffalo Bills, you can sort of stomach it that, hey, he didn't put up the fantasy points, but what a win, what a confidence boost for that young second-year quarterback. And then we saw it this week on the road in New Orleans against a team that New England should have beat. And they go in there and they get a win in New Orleans. Drake Maye has a season high with 3 passing touchdowns. Everything's sort of coming up Drake Maye here. He also adds 9 carries for 28 yards. It feels like we haven't seen a Drake Maye true spike week, where we're seeing it where he's getting some rushing production. He has 2 rushing scores on the year. We're seeing it where he's getting these 260, 270 passing yard games. But is he going to put up a 350 spot as a passer at some point soon? Is he going to put up 50 yards and a touchdown as a runner? And could he do one of those feats collectively in a game and put up an absolute smash week? It sort of feels like it. And he's got a huge comfort level behind center where it's starting to look like Drake Maye from North Carolina, where he's really putting up numbers. He's elevating the players around him. I think if you have Drake Maye in your lineup, you should feel very, very excited about where things are headed for the rest of the season. And I sort of buried the lead because this was the Thursday game. And Thursday's like, it feels like eons ago. You have so much going on in fantasy football that I don't want to talk to you about something you were thinking about days ago. But I would be remiss if I didn't recap what happened on Thursday night. I live on Long Island, and Giants fans are over the top excited right now. Cam Skattebo and Jaxson Dart were the 2 stars for the Giants, and the Giants beat the Philadelphia Eagles, and they don't just beat them. They beat the hell out of the Eagles. The 2025 Eagles feel like the 2023 Eagles right now. Talking about Jaxson Dart, I talked about him on Dynasty Life from a Dynasty lens, where he's up there in that top 10 QBs right now. Unbelievable what he's been able to do. He has 50 or more rushing yards in every single start this year. He's the 3rd player in NFL history, joining Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson as the quarterbacks who in their first 3 starts all had 50 rushing yards or more. Unbelievable. 13 carries, 58 rushing yards, and a touchdown. Also adds 195 passing yards and a touchdown. So, like, Dart is limited now. He doesn't have a Malik Neighbors, but he made some really, really big throws. We've seen the connection with Theo Johnson. Now we've seen Wan'Dale Robinson put up a big game with him. Jaxson Dart is completely locked in. He is a QB1, I think, moving forward when it comes to redraft. Difficult stretch here. He goes to Denver in week 7. That's a tough defense. Anybody who had to endure the Jets-Broncos game this morning from London, you see that Denver defense. That Denver defense is really coming on. Denver also went into Philly, got that win. So that's a big test for Dart. And of course, he goes to Philadelphia. But the way he's running the football, I think you can put him in your lineup. He's got a baked-in floor as a runner. And then we're going to talk about Cam Skattebo. And Cam Skattebo, unbelievable performance. And it's actually getting buried because Devon Achane puts up a number, Dowdle puts up a number, Josh Jacobs puts up a number. So Cam Skattebo, 31 points, should usually be the RB1 overall on the week. Heading into Sunday night, he's actually the RB4. But Cam Skattebo is like a folk hero now. He had 31 points, 3 rushing scores as a rookie here, 3 rushing scores on Thursday Night Football in front of a national audience, ripping off his shirt at the end of the game in the post-game interview. Like, this guy is like beloved right now. Showing up to the game in like a wife beater with his huge pendant. Cam Skattebo is just everything you were promised for him as a prospect, you're getting. He's this year's Bucky Irving, but even better because of the volume and because the running back 2s are not getting the sort of usage that we saw Rachaad White really challenging Bucky Irving with. So back-to-back years, we have a 4th round pick who's going to put up near RB1 numbers or RB1 numbers. Let's look at Skattebo since he took over. 13.9 points against Dallas in week 2, 24 points against Kansas City in week 3, 13 against LA in week 4, 14.4 against New Orleans in week 5, and now 31 points and 3 touchdowns. Got 5 touchdowns on the season already for Skattebo. He's completely locked in. And the thing about Skattebo that we love is in the games where they're not able to generate yards running the ball, he offers you a lot as a receiver. Cam Skattebo has 2 games with 6 catches or more, and he's had at least 2 catches in every single game this season. Skattebo and Dart completely locked in. Little bonus takeaway here. We talked about Joe Flacco this week, and I talked about this with Scott Barrett, and I talked about this with a number of other people, where Flacco goes to Cincinnati, and of course they lose the game today, but I think there's a lot of positivity when it comes to Ja'Marr Chase and Joe Flacco, what they were able to do to get today as teammates for the first time ever. And with Flacco, it was a very short sample size where he really didn't have any time to sort of ramp up here, but ends up having 2 passing touchdowns, only 219 passing yards, but did enough to sort of keep Cincinnati somewhat within striking distance. But what we wanted to see from Flacco was we wanted to see him hyper target Ja'Marr Chase, and he absolutely did that. Ja'Marr Chase, 12 targets, 10 catches, 94 yards, and a touchdown. Really impressive stuff from Chase. And again, he hasn't had a chance to even practice really with Joe Flacco. This was a very short buildup. Of course, Chase Brown, nothing special there. Only 42 yards on the ground, only 2 receptions. Big time disappointment there. Tee Higgins, 5 catches, gets 8 targets, 11 points, nothing special. But Joe Flacco, we saw this when he took over in Cleveland 2 seasons ago. He hyper-targeted David Njoku, and he was able to elevate Njoku. Now he's got arguably the best wide receiver in football, and that's a big argument now. A lot of people sort of debating the Puka Nacua versus Ja'Marr Chase in Dynasty versus Ja'Marr Chase in redraft. Of course, Nacua has a better shot this year because of the quality of the offense, depending on that injury. But Ja'Marr Chase is not going to go away quietly from the discussion of threats to finish as the wide receiver 1 overall. Chase now has 29 points in week 5, 25 points in his first week, again with Joe Flacco behind center. Week 7, Pittsburgh. Week 8 against the hapless New York Jets. And then week 9 against a very generous Chicago defense. You could see Ja'Marr Chase put up 3 straight weeks here in week 7, 8, and 9, where he's scoring 20-plus PPR points. I actually think I'd probably bet on that. Flacco is going to target Ja'Marr Chase a lot. This is probably Joe Flacco's last time as a starting quarterback in the NFL for a sustained period of time. I mean, Flacco just won't go away. It's been actually really impressive how he's been able to stretch his career out here. But Ja'Marr Chase is completely locked in. This is the number 1 target. This was the number 1 overall pick in redraft for a reason. Ja'Marr Chase looking good with Joe Flacco. Got to wrap up the injuries here, guys. This is a really tough one. I hate doing this. I buried this. So hopefully, I hope all of you guys watch to the end, but some of you watch early, so it was happiness. For the ones sticking around to the end, got to talk about it. David Njoku, a knee injury. Harold Fannin, a big week this week. Harold Fannin would trend up significantly if David Njoku were to miss time. We don't know the full extent of all of these injuries. But again, Harold Fannin today, 7 catches for 81 yards on 10 targets. If Njoku misses time, Fannin is going to go absolutely nuts. Garrett Wilson, the Jets were completely annihilated by Denver. Horrible fantasy scoring numbers for Justin Fields, Breece Hall, and of course, Garrett Wilson, who has a knee injury and a hip injury. The knee injury is the most significant one. A number of Jets beat reporters have talked about this could be a significant knee injury. We're going to find out the full extent Sunday night, Monday, but they're getting an MRI on the knee. This could be bad news for Garrett Wilson, fantasy managers. Really a tough one, and terrible news for Wilson. I don't want to get like full fantasy on this one because Garrett Wilson has been just tremendous this year. Of course, he got a big contract extension, but Garrett Wilson has been a really, really positive for the Jets. If Garrett Wilson misses a bunch of time, this offense is in complete free fall. And do not sleep on the Jets trading Breece Hall. Breece Hall might get traded. It seems like the writing is on the wall here. The Jets season is in a complete tailspin, and they haven't re-signed Breece Hall. They might trade Breece Hall. He wants to be a Jet, but I think they might trade him the way the season is heading. Marvin Harrison Jr., of course, with a concussion. He's going to miss week 7. Concussions, guys leave the game with a concussion. It's usually missing the following week unless there's some sort of a miracle here. NFL doesn't mess around with this, nor should they. Harrison Jr. is probably out in week 7. Got to talk about Emeka Egbuka because this one is super depressing. Leaves the game with a hamstring injury. We don't know the extent of this one. Baker Mayfield is just Baker Mayfield. He's going to cook no matter who's out there seemingly. But losing Egbuka would be a massive hit for Tampa Bay. Egbuka has just been fantastic. We hope this is nothing significant when it comes to Egbuka. We'll find out really, really soon. Sort of crossing our fingers and holding our breath on this one. Egbuka has been absolutely special all season long. We've talked about him here every single week in a positive light. Now I got to talk about this injury. Really, really tough stuff. Baker, of course, locked in. Looks like an MVP candidate this season. And then we'll mention Puka Nacua. Because Puka Nacua, it sounds like it's an ankle injury and the London game is in question. So LA with Puka has been unbelievable this year. But he looks like he might miss week 7 in London against Jacksonville. We're going to keep an eye on that one. We're going to find out everything about this. Make sure you're listening to all of our podcasts here on Fantasy Points. Make sure you're tuning in for Fantasy Football Daily podcast feed. If you're watching this on YouTube, do me a favor and subscribe to the podcast feed. If you're listening on the podcast feed, subscribe to our YouTube. It doesn't cost you anything. It helps us out a lot. And the School of Scott Fantasy Football podcast feed, make sure you subscribe to that as well. Scott Barrett and myself. Dynasty Life, my Dynasty podcast, dropping shows every single week. And fantasypoints.com, if you want to scale your fantasy game up, use the code Theo and get 15% off any Fantasy Points package, any subscription, 15% off. And we've had some great sales on there. The code Theo will add an extra 15% off. If you want to buy somebody you know a nice Christmas or Hanukkah present, it's a really great present to get. We are just loaded with information, articles, tools, and of course, Fantasy Points data, the best source of analytics and stats anywhere in fantasy football. Stick with us here at Fantasy Points. We're going to help you crush your fantasy leagues this season.